Okay, today's daf is Shabbat Nun Aleph. Today's shiur is dedicated by the Ray and Cohen families in memory of Elizabeth Maybaum, L'Sheva Bat Yehuda Zichrona Livracha, and by Freda Cohen in honor of Dr. Gary Zeitlin, infectious disease doctor at White Plains Hospital, who saved many lives over the past few months, and whose spirit has been lifted by the study of Talmud and this podcast. Okay, with that, we will start. The Mishnah on Daf Nun Aleph at the top. Lo kisau mi ba'od yom, lo yichasenu mi shetechshach. If you didn't cover it from before Shabbat, then you're not allowed to cover it once Shabbat comes in. And this is what we talked about. You're allowed to do hatmana with something that doesn't add any extra heat, but only if you do it before Shabbat. One thing that's interesting, one thing that came up over Shabbat, someone was asking me, I don't understand really how hatmana works. As I feel like it was clear to me then that I didn't explain it well enough, so I'm going to go back and explain the reality of what we're talking about. Most people, what they would do is they would either dig a hole in the ground and they would stick all these materials that we're talking about, the dregs of the grapes or let's forget the wool, let's put that aside for a minute, but all the other materials like the olive dregs. What they would do is they would line the hole with those objects and a chemical reaction would happen. And there's no heat added here. It's that when you put the pot inside, there's a chemical reaction, or when they sit for a while. I don't really understand the whole reality of it, whether it has to be when something's sitting on it or even just by them sitting by themselves, a chemical reaction happens and it heats up basically. And then it's going to add heat. And that's what they were using. We're not talking about an actual heat source. The whole issue was, maybe you would actually take coals and then the coals were worried that you would stoke. But all these other objects are not coals or anything that actually has heat, a heat source that they were actually lit up. But the idea is that they do create heat when you put them together. That's one type of hatmana. The other type is, let's say, the wool or the cloth materials, where then we're talking about what you and I would imagine as hatmana, which is actually wrapping something, the most we can think of, like we talked about the other day, wrapping with aluminum foil. And there I mentioned that if you have a few leftover pieces of chicken and you wrap them entirely in foil, it's not hatmana because you're just using that as your utensil to put them in. But if you had a pot and you decided to cover that pot and surround it with aluminum foil, that would be hatmana, that wouldn't be allowed. Okay, so that's basically the difference. Again, I wanted to kind of explain to you the reality. Often it was really this pit in the ground or some sort of area, because otherwise you can't just drape an object with dregs of olives. That doesn't make any sense. They'll just fall to the side. But it was in some kind of hole or some kind of space, and then they would do that, and that's what we're talking about here. So now again, back to the Mishnah. So if you didn't do it from before Shabbat, you can't do it once it gets dark. And we mentioned in the beginning, I'll re-mention it. The reason is, the concern is that if you're going to do hatmana right now, we're worried that you might heat it up before you want to keep it insulated. And therefore, we don't allow you to do it on Shabbat, lest you might come to heat it up. As opposed to, we mentioned in the Yerushalmi, they had other reasons, which is bitul beit hamidrash. They didn't want people not going to the beit midrash at nighttime, where they would hear a shiur during davening, or they wanted people to finish all their work before Shabbat. Kisau v'nitgale mutar l'chasotel. But here's an interesting halacha. If you did your hatmana, you insulated it before Shabbat with an object that was allowed, and then you opened it up. Now there's a debate here. Did you open it on Shabbat? Or even if you opened it and uncovered it before Shabbat, some people say, then you're allowed to redo the hatmana. Okay, basically we're saying that if once you did hatmana before Shabbat in the way that was allowed, even if you open it, you can close it up again. Okay, that's fine. Again, debate though, maybe if you opened it and uncovered it before Shabbat and you didn't go into Shabbat with it being in the status of hatmana, then maybe it's not allowed. So there's a bit of a debate about that. But for sure, if it's on Shabbat, then it's okay. You can fill up a jug of water, cold water, and put it under a pillow or under a blanket, even though theoretically that's hatmana. What's the issue? Well, you're being matmin something that's cold, and therefore we're not concerned. It's the whole concern that you might heat it up. Well, here, why would you be matmin something cold? Two options. Either you want to keep it cold, kind of like a thermos, you want to keep it cold, or you don't want it to get too hot. So you're protecting it from the sun. In other words, maybe you want to get, actually, I didn't say that right. Maybe you want to get the chill out, okay? You just want to get the chill out, or you actually want to keep it cold. So somehow you're insulating it in some way, either to protect from the sun, it doesn't get hot, or to just keep it a little bit warm, but not so warm. And then that's allowed. Although we're going to see actually a debate about this, because you might say, and we're going to talk about this, even though it's very clear from the Mishnah, we're going to see that that when it came to other objects, like, notice the Mishnah talks about specifically water. What if it's a piece of chicken that's cold and you want to put it in the ground so that the sun doesn't spoil it? So some people say, well, if we allow hatmana there, you might come to think that you're allowed to do hatmana for chicken even when it's hot. First of all, imagine somebody sees you doing this. They don't know that it's cold or hot, and then they might think it's allowed. So we'll talk about that soon. Actually, right now, because the Gemara starts off with Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mutar Lahatmina Tatzonein. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, you can actually entirely insulate something cold. So now this is a little strange that Rav Yehuda would say this in the name of Shmuel, because we just learned this in the Mishnah. Amar Rav Yosef, my kamashmalan. So Rav Yosef says, what are you trying to teach us? Tanina, it says in the Mishnah, exactly this. Mimale adam kiton v'noten tachat hakar o tachat hakesef. So Amar le Abaye tuva kamashmalan. Abaye says, no. He's trying to teach you something additional. De'imi matnitin, if you just learned it from the Mishnah, and this is always a problem. The Mishnah gives us very particular cases. The Mishnah doesn't always give us general rules. Sometimes they do, but often they give a particular case. And as I mentioned before, the case in the Mishnah was with a jug of water. So you might have thought, Hani Mile, that's only davar she'ein darko lahatmin. Generally, you don't put water, you don't insulate water. You generally insulate a cooked item. And therefore, something that's not generally insulated, of course you could do it if it's cold. But like I said before, you might think that something that it's darko lahatmin, that generally you would, like a cooked item, you might not be able to, and therefore kamash malan. That's why Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, or that's what Shmuel said, that you can. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rebbe. Now we get to a different opinion. Rav Huna passes down in the name of Rebbe, Asur lahatmin et hatzonim. Okay, it says here Amar Rav, but the note in the Masorah Shas says it should say Amar Rebbe, and we'll see exactly from right now, they're going to question this from Rebbe, so presumably he said in the name of Rebbe. So it's forbidding to do this. The Hatanya, but doesn't it say in a Braita, Rebbe he tirlat mina tatzonim? But another Braita says that Rebbe allowed this. So one source says Rebbe didn't allow it. Rav Huna is telling us, and this Braita says Rebbe did allow it. So Rav Huna must be wrong. So the answer lo kashya. No, not true. Ha mikame delishmei mi Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Ha lebatara delishmei. There were two. Actually, Rav Huna was a little bit wrong, because we're going to see. But one was before he heard this halacha from Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, who, by the way, we saw just the other day, if you remember. He was the one who said, my father was a tanner, and that's how I know that tanners do use these items. So this was before he heard from Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, and this one was after he heard from Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Now, we don't know yet what he heard and what he changed his mind to, so now we're going to see. He had the of Rebbe. Rebbe was sitting. He was teaching this halacha. Amar the Fanav, a student raises his hand and says, Amar Lefanav, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. So he gets up and pipes in and says, Abehi tir lahatmina tatzoneim. My father allowed this. Amar kfar horeza came. So Rebbe sits back and says, if he already allowed it, then who am I to forbid it? Right? Nice one comes and admits, okay, well, if he says it's okay, then it's okay. And now Rav Papa is going to comment on this. So obviously now it's clear that Rav Huna passed down from Rebbe's name that he forbade it. But now we're going to learn that Rebbe actually matured it after he forbade it. So actually Rebbe holds, in the end, he held that it was okay. From this story, Rav Papa learns, Rav Papa, bo re'eh kama mechavavim zeh zeh. He takes a step back and he looks at the story and he says, wow, look how much respect these rabbis have for each other. She'ilu Rabbi Yossi kayam haya, if Rabbi Yossi were alive at the time when Rebbe said this, kafufi yoshev l'fnei Rebbe, he would have been one of the students. He would have been, I don't know exactly a student, but Talmid Chaver, we call it, where he would be subordinate to Rebbe. How do we know this? Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, Demalem Makom Avotav. He was known that he filled the role of his father, meaning actually, the way some understand this, he was actually smarter and a better Talmid Chacham than his father was. And Kafuf Yosef with Rebbe, and yet Rabbi Yishmael was a student in front of Rebbe in order. He was subordinate to him. V'kamar, and here Rebbe came and said, Kfar Hoezaken, and he was willing to accept his words and change his opinion, right? Not only just accept what someone said, but go against what he intuitively thought. Okay, so here you see that Rebbe in the end allowed this. Again, the whole concern is only just in case something would happen, and you might come to confuse hot and cold, and therefore he thought to forbid it, but in the end he allows it. Amalei Rav Nachman leDaru Avdei. Now we're going to have a story with Rav Nachman and Daru, his servant. Atmin litzonen, insulate this cold item of mine, va'aiteli maya da'achim kfela araman, and bring me water that was warmed up by a non-Jewish baker, or I don't know, the word they translate is nachtom, which is a baker, but some non-Jewish cook. So warm it up with him. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? Well, so the warming up the water has nothing to do with Shabbat. We're going to see it has to do with bishul akum. A non-Jew generally can't cook something for you, but here we're talking about water, and it's going to be allowed, and we'll see why. And the first is about our issue that he could insulate something cold. Shama Rabbi Ami, the Ikpid, Rabbi Ami heard that he told this to his servant, and he said, this is no good. Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef now says to Rabbi Ami, my time, my Ikpid. Why was Rabbi Ami angry? I don't think he said it to Rabbi Ami. He said it about the story. He said, okay, let's look at the story and try to figure out what Rabbi Ami was upset about. And he says, I don't understand why he was upset. Kirabata Avid. He did exactly like his rabbi said. Chada kirav, chada kishmuel. One he held like Rav on one issue, and one he held like Shmuel. Kishmuel on the Hatmana issue, as we saw. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, mutar lahatmina tatzonei. Remember, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, this is allowed. So he's got no problem. He's got Shmuel to rely on. Kirav, when it came to the Bishul Akum case, the Amar of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav, kol shu ne'achal kemot shu chai, ein bo mishum bishulei nochrin. It's not going to be a problem that a non-Jew cook you something if you could eat it raw. It's a very important halacha because it basically takes out a whole category of items that you don't have to worry if a non-Jew cooks them, because if they can be eaten raw, like many vegetables, let's say, and they cook up a vegetable dish, that's not a problem of bishul akum. Okay, and therefore water isn't. Now comes the punchline of the story. Now we want to understand, well, why did Rabbi Ami get upset at him? We have a few indicators here today about manhigut, leadership, and about how to relate, right? First, we saw about the respect that Rebbe had, even though theoretically Rabbi Yosef would be subordinate to him, and yet he took his opinion seriously. Now we have another nice line. Hu savar adam chashuv shani. Why did Rabbi Ami get upset that he did these things? Because he felt like he's an adam chashuv. An adam chashuv should hold himself to a higher standard, right? This is something that unfortunately is very relevant nowadays about leaders holding themselves to higher standards, right? Our wish at this point is that the leaders hold themselves to the same standards as everybody else, but all the more so, the idea being that a leader should hold themselves to a higher standard. Why? Well, it's very obvious, especially in this case. Let's take Hatmana or even the Bishul Akum case. If these two things are both allowed, but they both have something like them that's not allowed. And if people see them doing the thing that is allowed, they might think that what's not allowed is allowed. They might come to learn from there, say, oh, well, if they do that, then obviously we could do this. It's always, right, someone who's a leader, someone has to hold themselves to a higher standard because everybody does a little less than the leader. So if the leader holds themselves to the high standard, they'll drop down a level and then they'll be okay. But if the leader doesn't hold himself to a higher standard, well then, everyone drops down a level, well then they're going to end up doing things incorrectly, okay? What's interesting about this is on the one hand, he holds that people should be able to, the leader should hold themselves to a higher standard. On the other hand, what's interesting is, in the end, he did what was right and it was okay, right? So that Rabbi Ami was upset because he felt, it's not like everybody thought that. The other side was, Rabbi Yosef said, what do you mean? He was doing like the halacha, it's totally fine. But obviously, nobody thinks that leaders can hold themselves to a lower standard. That's cool. Okay, moving on. Tana Rabbanan. Now we're going to have a long braita with a whole bunch of different sections in it. Most of them having to do with Hatman, although at the end we're going to be a little off topic. Tana Rabbanan. Afal pi shamru ein tonim afilu b'davar she'eino mosif hevel mishachashecha imbal b'davar she'eino mishachashecha. So even though they say you can't insulate items, even if it doesn't add any heat once Shabbat comes in, If you want to add a little bit more to the hatmana, and this is again, if you have, you want to wrap it a little bit more, or you want to you had some of the dregs on the side and you want to add a few more, that's fine. Okay, once it's already in place and you just want to add to it, that's already okay. Now it's a bit of a strange wording. Ketzad said, almost sounds like, in what way can you do this? But Rashbag doesn't really answer that question. And in fact, some of the versions of the text don't have those words, and it makes a lot more sense without those three words. Which really means that Rashbag is now talking about something a little bit different. Rashbag omer notel et hastinin umeniach et haglufkarin. O notel et haglufkarin umeniach et hastinin. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that if you did hatmana with a certain material, you can take that off and rewrap it with something else, even on Shabbat. So you can swap the wrapping, and Rashi explains that these wrappings had a different measure of heat. Now, theoretically, if it's a very hot day, the glufkarin is warmer than the sadin. The sadin is like a sheet, and the glufkarin is something warmer than that. I think it's more woolly. And he basically says, right, you might get to a situation where it's very sunny out, and you don't want, by the way, the whole issue of hatmana can also be somewhat sun-related. They did this, even though they're doing this at before Shabbat, and then Shabbat comes in, but even for the next day. And if the sun hits down on one of these objects, right, it heats things up. We all know that, right? Sand, for example, was one of the things. You walk in the sand, it's much hotter than the ground often. The sand really retains its heat. So anyway, if you want to swap one for the other, let's say it's very hot out and you had something very warm around and you want to put something lighter, or the reverse, that you're allowed to do according to Rashbag. Okay, he says you can switch it even if the object you're putting it in is even warmer than the first one. Okay, as long as you did the hatmana before Shabbat, we're not worried. Not only that, but hatmana, insulating, is only forbidden if you do it in the utensil where you heated up the food originally. Aval im pina, we go back to kli rishon, kli sheni. Im pina mimecham lemecham. If you poured the water or whatever it was into a different pot, mutar, you're allowed to insulate on Shabbat. Now, why is this? This makes perfect sense with the Bavli's interpretation of hatmana. Okay, they're taking a little break in the Breita now to explain this halacha, and then we'll go back to the Breita. If you already cooled it down by putting it into the other pot, then what? Are you worried you're going to boil it up again? Of course you're not going to boil it up again. If you wanted to keep it that hot, you would have left it in the original pot. So as soon as you move it to something that, again, this is all about what your intent is. So intent sometimes is shown by actions. If you show by your actions that your intent is not to keep it hot, then we're not worried that you're going to start heating it up again. Now we're going back to the issue of hatmana with something that's potentially muktzah and moving it and all that. So now we're going to have a bunch of options. If you insulated it and covered it with something that's nital b'Shabbat, meaning it's not muktzah, or tamam b'davar she'eino nital, your hatmana was done, your insulation was done with something that is muktzah, but it's covered kisa b'davar nital b'Shabbat, but the cover is not muktzah. Then you can take it out, put it back in, because you only have to move the cover, and the cover's not muktzah. But if tamam v'kisa b'davar she'eino nital b'Shabbat, but if it was insulated and covered with something that can't be moved on Shabbat, shetamam b'davar nital b'Shabbat, the items you use for insulating can be moved, but the kisui, but the cover, kisa b'davar she'eino nital b'Shabbat, the cover is muktzah. Then now it depends. Theoretically, think about it. Generally, you open a pot by taking off the cover. The cover's muktzah, so you can't do that. So what do they say? Well, if often we put the pot cover on a little bit to the side, right? It's not fully on. Then theoretically, you can hold the pot, right, which isn't muktzah, and you can take it out by holding the pot and not the cover. So if that's the way you can do it, then you can take it out and put it back in, because you can do everything without actually having to touch the cover and move it. V'im lav, but if you can't do it that way, eino notel machzir, then you actually can't get it out. Okay, so you have to come up with some way to get it out. This is obviously giving you some good advice. Make sure your cover isn't muktzah, because otherwise you're going to be a little bit stuck. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, na'oret shel pishtan daka. This is when they comb the flax, and when you comb it, some little pieces come out. So na'oret shel pishtan daka hareu kezevel. This is the material there of the flax. The little pieces of flax are like the zevel, okay, the manure, which we talked about, that was in the category of items that are mosif hevel. Okay, this adds heat, and therefore you can't use it even before Shabbat. Again, we're just having a bunch of different halachot relating to Hatmana, and as I said, we're going to get at the very end to something that doesn't have anything to do with Hatmana. Sprite is kind of combining a whole bunch of different things. Minichim mecham al gabe mecham uktera al gabe ktera. By the way, I made a chart on the sheet to make it a little bit easier to follow. About on the left side of the chart is all what the issue is in each category, so that you follow what the issues are, because it's a little bit jumpy. Minichim mecham al gabe mecham uktera al gabe ktera. If you have something you heat the hot water in, and you put the other thing that you heated hot water in, the hot water on top of the hot water, that's fine. Uktera al gabe ktera, or a pot into another pot. And here we have a big girsa problem, okay? The next part can be read in one way or the opposite way. Okay, what we have here says avalo, however, you can't do ktera al gabe mecham u'mecham al gabe ktera. Okay, there's an assumption, according to this version of reading it, that if you put the same type item in the same type item, the assumption is the heat is the same, and therefore one's not going to heat up the other. But if you put something different into, right, each one into the other, the pot on the mecham or the mecham on the pot, then it's an issue. But some people actually take out, if you look in the bet, sends you the Masorah Shas, hach avalo hu ta'ut. This is a mistake, and it should say everything's allowed. Mecham into ktera, ktera into mecham. You could see why there's different halachic opinions about everything, because right here you would get to the opposite conclusion based on what version in the text you had. Avalo, okay, betachet pia bebatsek. Okay, now they're talking about you can take batsek. Now, batsek is dough. You obviously can't make the dough on Shabbat. That's an issue of lash. But you can take batsek. Rashi tells you that was done already miba odyom. It was already prepared from the day before. And you can stick it on the top of the pot, okay, kind of as a cover. And it's not an issue of hatmana. Okay, they allow this. It's not a problem. Okay, the issue is the whole issue of putting kelim, cold things on top of hot things, is you can do it not in order to warm them up, but you can do it in order to keep the heat inside. Okay, it's allowed to keep the heat in, but not if you actually want to heat it up more. Like we saw before, this bright is saying the same thing, the same thing is one of the approaches that we saw, which is just like you can't insulate hot items, you're also not allowed to insulate cold items. That was the opinion that forbade it. And here we're going to see Rebbe hitir latmina tatzonim. Breita brings Rebbe's approach after he changed his mind, and he said you can actually do this. Here comes the issue that has nothing to do with anything here. Ein miratzin lo et hasheled v'lo et habarad b'Shabbat b'shvil she'yezov meimav. You can't take snow and break it up into pieces in order to get water out of it, or barad, which they really mean, right, hail, or as we would call ice. Okay, you can't turn ice into water on Shabbat. Now, what do you mean? Don't we use ice on Shabbat? So, keep reading. But you can put it in a cup that has water in it, or in a pot that has something in it, and it can, I guess the issue here, by the way, okay, I'll get to it in a second, but you don't have to worry about it, meaning it's not an issue if you put it into something else. Before I even get to what the issue is here, because the issue has nothing to do with Hatmana, I assume why they brought it up here is because we're talking about cold and hot and cooling something off. So now they're jumping to, well, what if you cool off something where it actually changes form, right? We're not talking about cooling off water or a drink or a cooked item where it's going to still be in the same form, solid or liquid. But what if you change something from a solid to a liquid? So now the question is, what's the issue here? So Rashi says something interesting. He says, Mishum de kamolid b'Shabbat. You're creating something new. Changing something from a solid to a liquid is nolad. Okay, and then he says, now there's no actual nolad. We've talked about that nolad is muktzah, right? You can't use something that was created on Shabbat. It's not like there's an isser laholid something on Shabbat. So he says, v'dame lemalacha sheborei mayim ha'elu. Says it's kind of like a malacha because you're creating something that wasn't created before Shabbat. Many explain that this isn't what the real issue here. It's actually like squeezing a lemon. Squeezing a lemon on Shabbat is asur, although we'll talk about in 1 minute how it's allowed. But squeezing a lemon is forbidden if you want to make lemon juice out of it. If you want just liquid, or you're putting it in a dressing that's liquidy, So you can't squeeze a lemon because you're basically creating a liquid. You're taking it out. It's a tolada of dash. Dash is when they separated the wheat from the chaff. You're basically separating something out. It's there also, right? The wheat was inside the chaff, and you're kind of peeling away the outer layer and taking out what's inside, and it's coming out. That's a problem. However, just like if you put it letocha kos or letocha ka'ara and it just melts on its own, likewise with lemon, you're allowed to put it on a solid because there you're not actually creating a lemon juice. The lemon just gets absorbed into something else, and then it's okay. But to put it into a liquid or to just squeeze it by itself would be a problem. Okay, so that seems to be the issue there. And I guess again, it's mentioned here because of the cold of the heat and that kind of, we were talking about lahafshir to take out the chill. So maybe that's why it's mentioned here. I guess that would be the only reason. Now we're starting a whole new section, which again has to do with preparations before Shabbat. We still haven't gotten to Shabbat yet. Okay, we're already in Perek Hamishi and we're still on preparations, things before Shabbat. Animals. Okay, your animals, we have a chiyuv that our animals have to rest on Shabbat also. We can't work our animals. There's both, it appears in a lo taseh twice in the Torah and the Seret HaDibrot it appears. Lo taseh kol malacha, and then it says, right, ata ubincha u'pitecha, and, right, abdecha, your eved we learned about, and your amatcha, and your behemtecha, and your animals. So you can't work your animals. That means, okay, so now, there's also another pasuk that's an aseh, a mitzvah aseh, which is, you have to rest so that your shor and chamor will also rest. So now there's a debate about this issue. What we're going to talk about right now is animals can't carry on Shabbat either. Okay, now we're not really talking about carrying loads. That's obvious they can't carry loads. That's actual malacha. But not only that, but just like I can't take out something from my private domain to my public domain or to a public domain or the reverse, animals also can't go out carrying things on Shabbat or walking in Reshut HaRabim for Amma. And we're going to start, this is going to be about the animal, then we're going to get to women, then we're going to get to men. Okay, we'll see why there's difference men and women. I already kind of referenced it. We talked about the jewelry. We'll get back to that soon. People like to make jokes, Bameh Behema and Bameh Isha and, animal-women connection. Anyway, we'll leave that aside. But what we have here is a debate about the issue of hotza'ah by animals. Is it, if you do this, and the animal, okay, let me get back to two things before we move on to that again. The question is going to be, when is something, and this is a question for all of hotza'ah, and then we'll get specifically to animals, is something part of what you wear normally, and then you're allowed to wear it? Or is it something that's not, okay, there's going to be two issues. Either it's not something you wear normally, or it's something where concern might fall off, even if you do wear it normally, and it is your clothing, so to speak. We'll talk about what's clothing for an animal, because now that's generally clothing. But what is considered something that even if it were considered your clothing, it might accidentally fall off, and then the owner might pick it up and carry it in Reshut HaRabim. So those are a few of the issues. With an animal, the issue becomes, is it protecting the animal? If it's protecting the animal, which might mean also it's the leash for the animal where you carry the animal, that's all considered protection of the animal, and that's allowed because you're protecting the animal. That is allowed. What if it's not protecting the animal? Or we're going to get to today, what if it's the animal doesn't need such a strong level of protection? So is that already considered, and we're going to use the words of the Gemara or the Rishonim, is a masoy. A masoy is something that's already something you're carrying. But now let's get back to the main issue. If an animal carries this, what's the isur? Is it an isur? What, are you forbidden? So some people say when it says your animal can't do work, it means manual labor. And this is not manual labor. This is just carrying something. That's not the same as manual labor. And it's actually not included in the lo taseh that your animal can't work. Your animal can't work means you can't put heavy loads on your animal. You can't make your animal plow on Shabbat. You can't, all those type things. But carrying from Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim is not included in that. Therefore, what is it included in? The aseh. You're basically not doing the mitzvah aseh, the positive commandment to let your animal rest. Because one of the things that means not resting is one of the malachot of carrying. So some people say it's only a bitul aseh. Other people say, no, it's actually a lo taseh. It's part of your animal can't work. Any of the malachot are considered work. This again shows that hotza'ah is, by some people, considered a bit of a different category than all the other malachot. Okay? And then, even those who say it's a lo taseh, you still wouldn't get lashes for this. If your animal walks out carrying this item, you don't get lashes, but you have violated a mitzvah lo taseh. Okay, with that, we'll get started. Enough background. We have the exact same structure of, yes and no. So here, though, it's going to be an A, B, A, B, okay? First, they're going to tell you all the items. And this is because they want to tell you each animal has a particular item that's generally used for protecting that animal. So they're going to go into all the details. And again, we're going to have one of those cases where it said in the Mishnah, it wasn't clear to people in the Gemara, and they had to explain, well, what is this? And then we're going to say to the words of the Gemara, well, we don't know what that is either. So one of those, again, we're using all these words that are not commonly used, and people didn't know even in the time of the Gemara what in the time of the Mishnah they were using because they were living in Israel, and then the others were living in Babylonia, and they didn't have the same items, or they didn't call it the same thing. And anyway, we'll start with that. Yotzei hagamal, a camel goes out ba'afsar, with a muzzle. V'na'aka, okay, we'll have to see what a na'aka is, b'chatam, with a nose ring. Because again, the nose ring wasn't just jewelry, it was used to string, right, the rope on it where they would they would use for moving the animal. V'luvdikim, we'll see what this is, b'prumbia. Okay, this is like reading Chinese, right? It's all these words, nobody understands what they are. Okay, Julie, you're not going to be able to help us today because this is not your field as far as I know. V'sus b'sher, and sus, we saw this word sheraim, it was a neck piece. B'chol ba'alei hasher, and all other animals that have these neck pieces, yotzim b'sher v'nimshachim b'sher. Okay, they can go out with the sher and they can be pulled with using this sher. Umazin alehem, now we're getting to a different topic. While this neck piece is on the animal, let's say it became tameh, impure. And it became impure from tumat mei, from the dead person. So what do you have to do? We talked about this the other day. You have to sprinkle some of the mechatat, the purification waters from the para aduma, the red heifer. And what they would do is they would take a twig of ezov, and it's a type of tree, and they would dip it in the mixture after they make the whole mixture, and then they would sprinkle it. They would kind of throw it onto the item. We saw already the other day that the whole item doesn't need to be sprinkled. You just need to sprinkle on part of it. It's not like a mikvah where the whole thing has to go under. And you can do this while it's on the animal. It seems like there's an issue that you can't, if the mechatat, let's say I dip it in and I sprinkle it onto an animal, let's say I sprinkle it onto this object that's on the animal, if I sprinkle it and some of it gets on the animal, then everything in my bucket or whatever it is that I have my mechatat in becomes impure. If it gets in contact with the animal, it becomes impure. But you're allowed to sprinkle on this neck piece because we know that people are very careful, and we know they can be careful that it won't get on the animal. Okay, it's a bit of a strange halacha. We'll leave it at that for right now. V'tovlan bimkoman, and you can tovel them in their place, meaning if the animal goes in the water and the neck piece is on the animal and he dunks in the water, as long as there's space in between the neck piece and their neck and the water can get in, that's enough to consider it tovel. Okay, back to our issue of what are these items. So the Gemara starts off, my naka bechatam. So we don't know what naka is, we don't know what chatam is. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, naketa chivarte v'zamama de parsela. It's a camel that's white with an iron nose ring. Okay, that's what they had. Okay, the luvdikim b'prumbia, Amar Rav Huna, chamra luba. It's a donkey from Lub, which was a place near Egypt, in Egypt. It's a bit unclear exactly what Lub is what it's considered, whether it was actually part of Egypt or out of Egypt, but near Egypt. Beparge de barzela. This is a halter of iron. Levi Shada, now we're going to have a story, which actually seems very strange why they're bringing this story. The only reason they're bringing the story, at least at first glance, is because it has to do with these camels from Lub. But what the meaning of the story is and how it really connects to here, I don't really know. Everyone can be free to think about it on their own, and if they come up with something, happy to hear. I couldn't come up with a connection. Levi Shadar Zuze Lebechosai. Levi sent money to Bechosai. Now it's going to come up in another sugya much later on, I think in Baba Kama, where somebody had money in someone's hands in Bechosai. I don't remember all the details, but I remember it was this big issue because Bechosai was really far away. Okay, and Rashi even says here, it was Rachot Bavel Malach Chatzi Shana. It was a half year's journey away from Bavel. So he sends money for whatever reason. I guess he wanted to get them from there. Maybe they were close to Lub, and that's why I thought that was the place to get it. So he sends money, okay, he sends money to Beit Chazai for someone to send him back a donkey from Lub. Sahu Shadrule, they wrapped up the money that he sent them and they sent it back. The Shadrule Sa'are, they sent back the money and they sent back barley. Okay, why did they do this? Lamemra denigre dechamre Sa'are. The footsteps, or how you say it, of the donkey are se'ori, meaning, number one, way too far for you to be having this donkey walk to get to you. Go find a donkey. I'll give you a good example. Okay, people who try to buy things in America and bring them to Israel, right? And my parents always laugh at me. I've been in Israel 28 years or something, and I still bring certain things back from America. Obviously now we're all stuck because anything we bring back from America, we can't anymore because no one's traveling. But anyway, they always laugh at me. Oh, they sell this in Israel, I see. And you can buy things close. You don't have to bring them from so far. So anyway, basically they say, what are you doing buying this here? And they say, you clearly don't know anything about donkeys from Lub. If you think that the donkey can make the half year journey, here, take some se'olim. That's what the donkey needs to survive, okay? Here's some good tips for someone who clearly doesn't know so much about this. Okay, I don't know why they bring that up here. One can think about it. Maybe it has to do with, all this stuff about animals and how you should have more knowledge about animals if you own them, and you should know more about them. And then it gets into how you watch the animal, which animal needs what type of shmira. Maybe it's kind of telling you, well, you need to know all the laws and what's relevant for each animal if you're going to own them, because there's ramifications for Chot Shabbat. There, I came up with some sort of connection. Okay, sometimes it helps when I teach it. It helps me think more about it. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Machlifim lifnei Rebbe. The students asked in front of Rebbe, Shalzo bezo mahu. So the Mishnah said, they're now talking about the first two objects, Hagamal ba'afsal and an Akah b'chatan. Right, one had the muzzle and the other had the nose ring. So what if you switch it? Okay, what if you put the afsal, you're talking about, and is an Akah allowed to go out with an afsal? And is Gamal allowed to go out with a chatan? So they say, now we're going to learn a little bit about the differences between these animals. An akah with an afsal, for sure, is not a question, because clearly, okay, an akah is a bigger animal. So therefore, the afsar, the muzzle, isn't going to help it at all. And therefore, it's considered a masoy, and it's not allowed. The question's going to be the gamal b'chatan. But what about a camel, which is smaller, and you put on this stronger type of way of protecting the animal? Since it would have been enough to just put an afsar on and you put something bigger than that, do we consider it a masoy? Or do you say that if it has extra method of protection, that's not considered a masoy? So, Amar Lefanav Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Again, we have Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi piping in. And what does he pipe in with? He pipes in with his father. Okay, he seems to be constantly quoting his father. So now he says, Kach Amar Abba, this is what my father said. My father said, Arba behemot yotzot ba'afsal. Okay, there's 4 animals that go out with an afsal. Hasus v'hapered v'hagamal v'chamor. Okay, the horse, the mule, the donkey, the camel, and the donkey. So now they assume, lemiute mai, lav lemiute gamal b'chatam. Isn't this to say they go out with an afsal and not anything else? So the Gemara says, no, you don't have to say that. You could say no. It's coming to exclude which animals can't go out with an afsal. It doesn't mean that this gamal can't go out with something else. It's just limit uten akab afsar. It's to say these 4 animals go out with an afsar, but an akab, which an afsar wouldn't actually do anything, wouldn't be strong enough to be able to move that animal. That wouldn't work. In a Braita, they bring up a Braita that says luvdikim v'gamal yotzim ba'afsal. Okay, they bring another. The luvdikim would also go out with an afsal. Okay, that's the chamora from Lub. Kitanai. Now they say this whole issue of shmira yitera, okay, something that's more protective than it needs to be, is a machloket tanaim. Again, here's your hint. It says kitanai and not lema or nema kitanai. If we would say, let us say, it's a machloket tanaim, we're always going to reject it. This is actually going to say it, and it's going to mean it. It's going to last. Kitanai. Ein chaya yotza b'sugal. Okay, chaya can't go out, an animal can't go out with a collar around its neck. Hananya omer yotza b'sugal. Hananya says it actually can. Ubechol davar hamishtamer, and anything that protects it, doesn't matter if it's too much or not. Now, how do we know that we're talking about something that's shmira yiterata, which Hananya allows? By the way, this is the same Hananya that allowed in the Perek Kira. If you remember, in the third Perek, he was the one who allowed if it was a third of the way cooked, right? And if he had all these heterim, also he has heterim. So what's the case here? If we're going to say we're talking about a chaya gdola and they're talking about this collar around the neck, right? It sounds like a collar around a dog. Well, that's not going to help a big animal. Right? That wouldn't help a big animal. So we obviously can't be talking about that. If you're talking about something small, obviously that's the way you would, that's typical for a small animal. So they say it must be something in between. Tanakama savar kevan desagile b'mitna ba'alma masoyhu. The Hananya savar kol netiruta yiterata lo amrina masoyhu. They say it must be that since a regular, you wouldn't need something so strong, right? This is actually something smaller than a chayak tana, I assume they're talking about. You wouldn't need something so strong at all, right? And therefore, since you could use something much lighter, this sugar wouldn't be a masoy. I'm sorry, this sugar would be a masoy. Or Hananya says, no, even if it's way more than the animal needs, it's still fine. Amar Rav Huna bar Chia, Amar Shmuel, halacha kechananya. And in fact, we paskin like Hananya. And we're going to end with a story about how we know we paskin like Hananya, or just proof that we paskin like Hananya. Levi bereid Rav Huna bar Chia, berabba bar Rav Huna haba ka'azle ba'orcha. They were walking on the path. Kadme chamer de Levi lechamer de Rabba bar Rav Huna. The donkey of Levi gets in front of the donkey of Rabba bar Rav Huna. This was disrespect. And in fact, chalash date to Rabba bar Rav Huna. He got upset. So now came Rav Huna bar Chia with a creative way to basically say, listen, I didn't mean to go in front of you. It was really my donkey, and I couldn't control my donkey. So what does he do to do this? Here you have creative rabbis. Amar Emale Milti, he said to himself, I'll tell him something in order to appease him and to make him realize that I didn't do this on purpose and it was just my crazy donkey. So what does he say? He asks him a halacha and he couches it in my crazy donkey. Amar le chamor she'asakav ra'im kigon zeh. He says, I just randomly want to ask you about some crazy animal. Oh, like mine, okay? Like my crazy donkey who I can't control. Mahu latzei b'prumbia b'Shabbat. Could he go out with the prumbia, which is normally what a donkey wears, but my animal can't be controlled by a prumbia, which is way of basically telling him that he didn't really want. I don't know if he really wanted to know the answer to this question, but he wanted to tell him my donkey's crazy and I really didn't do this on purpose. And then he says to him, this is what your father said in the name of Shmuel, we passed him like Hananya. Okay, he's basically saying, I wonder if this shows maybe he wasn't even appeased. It's a good question because he says, what do you mean your father said this, don't you know? Or maybe he alluded to the fact, I get why you're saying this and I understand what you're trying to say. So it's not clear from the story whether he ends up forgiving him and he realizes it or not. But anyway, at least Rav Huna bar Chia tried to appease him by saying that. And in the end, you see, again, the halacha is like Hananya, that we allow shmira yiterata. It's not considered masoy. Okay, we'll continue more with this tomorrow.